there are things to be taught in terms of like how to entrepreneur,
Yeah.
as much as people are just like, go wild, do whatever. It's like there are rules to the game. But it's like, is this worthwhile? Am I just going to be,
Yes.
like losing all my money if I attempt this,
Yes, I definitely talked about one of my biggest things is like, okay, just open a spreadsheet. I don't care if you're not good at business. Like, open a
Yeah,
spreadsheet and try and make up some numbers and multiply them
right.
such that you get a business that is reasonable and all of the numbers are things that you believe are possible.
Yeah,
And if you
exactly.
cannot do that, then perhaps it's a non-starter.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
okay, I have an audience of this very specialized group, but there's only maybe like 10,000 of those people in the world. And if I'm charging them whatever, $20 a month, then the
Hmm.
maximum amount of money that I could make is $20,000 a month. And that's not enough
Yeah,
to pay more than like two people's salaries.
right, right.
So that's not going to run a company. Like that kind of level of stuff, I think is
Yeah, yeah.
important.
Yeah, like you need to have like a back of the napkin math P&L like
Yeah.
just sketched out. So you're just like, does this make any sense? And if that back of the napkin P&L is like, no, then it's like maybe let's look for something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to the Fast and Broken podcast, where we take a critical look at the fast-moving world of tech and online culture. I'm Carly Rector, a software engineer and startup founder who will not stop harping on LLMs not being a magical truth machine.
And I'm Teresa Kramer, MBA student, project manager, and semi-professional voice actor who really thinks LLMs are just fancy algorithms, and nothing has disabused me of that notion yet.
Yep. True, true.
Mhm.
That's relevant to our first topic here, which is back to the first thing that we talked about again, which was woke AI. Like the very first topic in our very first episode
Yes.
was the executive order on woke AI. And the news
Mhm.
this week is that the White House has been working on a new AI-related executive order to preempt state AI regulations. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the Cloudflare outage from this past week, which shut down a bunch of the internet, and in particular, the sort of postmortem that they posted after it, and some comments that the CEO made on how they put it together. And then we're going to talk a little about consensus investing, because that's been a big topic lately. So those are our topics for today. We can actually look at the full draft of the executive order. The Verge got a hold of it and posted it. I actually posted on LinkedIn about this already this week because I was just so frustrated reading it. But I will read out some of the quotes that I called out there as well. To win, American AI companies must be free to innovate without cumbersome regulation. And then they talk about the California stuff, and then they talk about a new Colorado law about so-called, quote, algorithmic discrimination may even force AI models to embed DEI in their programming and to produce false results in order to avoid a, quote, differential treatment or impact on Colorado's enumerated demographic groups. But the United States AI regulatory framework must prioritize truth. That's particularly relevant here because one of the things they specifically call out in this executive order is a direction to the chairman of the FTC to evaluate which state laws that require alterations to the, quote, truthful outputs of AI models are preempted by the FTC's Act's prohibition on engaging in deceptive acts or practices affecting commerce. So their argument
Yeah.
is going to be that anything that is regulating the outputs of an LLM is deceptive under FTC
Yeah.
rules.
Specifically, I was looking at this, like, 'cause I think Politico also put out an article on this, specifically, like, the in context of government, like where this is coming in is in the interstate commerce clause, which is like, it's very interesting this is coming in an executive order because I feel like it's almost certainly doomed to failure because Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, the like gives Congress the power to regulate, like I think it's
Yes.
like Congress gets interstate commerce power. I think one of the most common cases that political science students and like law students tend to get exposed to in this is like I can't remember the name of the case. I'm gonna have to look it up, but it's about mud flaps on trucks because it was basically about how the state of Illinois wanted trucks to use a certain type of mud flap that like resulted in, like them kicking up less water when they were driving, and it was like safer for highway driving for other people. But like, I think that got struck down as being too restrictive to interstate commerce because it would require that truck drivers either had to have these flaps equipped all the time, or they would have to stop inside the Illinois border and change out their mud flaps. And so like the Supreme Court deemed that that was too restrictive to interstate commerce, and so it struck that one down. That's kind of gives you an idea of the precedent that we're talking about here from a from a judicial perspective, is that it's like something has to have a substantial impact, but like, yeah, the power isn't vested in executive. That's not an executive thing that the president can do. It's within Congress. It's posturing more than it's like anything that's actually going to have like an outsized political impact on the state laws that are being implemented.
So the interstate commerce thing is one angle of it. And the argument there is like a patchwork of state laws for AI will make it really hard for the AI companies to innovate and develop things if they have to like figure out how they can follow the lowest common denominator law of all of this patchwork of laws. And like, first of all, that's a little bit hypothetical at this point because he says that there's been like 1,000 bills introduced, but most of those have not passed. They only have a couple in here that they call out in particular. So there's that argument, but the related to the truth part, there's actually a different thing in here that is not interstate commerce related, the argument that they're trying to make. And that is that like it's against the FTC Act's prohibition on deceptive acts or practices affecting commerce. So that's like the truth in advertising rules. So their argument here basically is that it is deceptive for people to make, like specifically not the California disclosure laws, which they're also making like a insane free speech argument about, I think, but like the Colorado law that is about discriminatory practices by AI models. They're basically saying like the discrimination is truth because it's coming out of the model, and if you try and change it, that is deceptive, is the argument that they're making here. And therefore you shouldn't be able to pass those laws that basically like mandate deception, which again, like we talked about the thinking that people have on here, which is like it is absolute objective truth that you're getting from the magical machine. And therefore, if you go in and try and like modify its outputs, you're messing with it, which is just like factually untrue. But that is the argument they're making here. And they're trying to make it a legal argument in the sense that they're trying to argue that these laws that modify the outputs of an LLM are legally deceptive, which I think is very interesting. Putting aside the woke argument for a second, if I take their side and I'm like, okay, Colorado passed a law that says all LLMs must say climate change is fake or something like that.
Yeah.
Like that's something that I think is factually untrue. Then would that fall under this law? Like passing a law that says that something that people are selling must say an untrue thing. Basically. I don't think that's what's happening here, but I can see where, like, if that was what was happening here, you could apply this law to it.
Yeah, like, you could, but it's I feel like it's murkier than just, like, especially it's one of those things where it's like, as long as you had, like, a clause or like, like, somewhere in your terms and conditions, like, a statement that basically says, it's like, this is not, like, the AI does not present to you objective fact, you know, that gets around it immediately. You have to make such a weird straw man argument to use the FTC's like application, because the FTC's application is usually targeted towards the companies themselves. It's not usually targeted towards states' regulation either. You have to like get in the weird headspace of like, oh, California and Colorado are trying to force the AI to say things that are fake. And that that's I know that that's what they're saying, but also I'm like but you are willfully misinterpreting the laws that they are putting on the books at that point in time. You're not going to fly very far in court with that. It's like if you're basically saying it's like the state law is mandating that companies lie, and any judge worth their salt looks at the law and says there's nothing in here that says that the company has to lie, it's like your case gets thrown out. And it's like, have fun appealing them up to the Supreme Court, which is probably based on recent precedent going to support the state's rights to regulation. So it's like, what are you trying to achieve here other than wasting a lot of time and money? Like taxpayer money specifically. Like,
I mean,
Yeah.
intimidating at least some states to stop doing this, I think.
Right.
But
But it's also like I feel like the states that are doing this aren't going to be intimidated.
no.
Do you think this is intimidating Gavin Newsom? I don't think this is intimidating Gavin Newsom at all. It's like
No.
yeah, it's like Colorado just voted to tax billionaires to like provide kids with lunches. It's like I don't think this is intimidating the Colorado like, you know, legislature either. So it's like it's yeah, it's just like a weird dog whistle to the base kind of thing. It's just like I feel like this is just like I'm setting myself up to lose so I can whine about how the nasty Democrats won.
I'm somewhat less optimistic about that in the sense where it's like a lot of what he's talked about here is the FTC, and we have seen that the FTC is able to intimidate people, well, at least companies, into stop doing
Companies,
things.
yeah,
So
yeah. But yeah, it's like the FTC is able to like was intimidating companies, but some of those companies that the FTC intimidated have like gone back on that
that's
now.
true.
It's like because like Jimmy Kimmel's on the air. It's like we talked about this, so it's like
Yes.
that was a losing battle. They did lose, even if it looked like they might have won at the beginning. At the end, they kind of lost, and it kind of had a Streisand effect of like just
Yeah.
you know further highlighting the person who they were trying to get at.
I also would hope that this would not like effectively suppress any states from doing
Yeah,
things, but also like I could see if you were on the edge of like, should we do this? Let be like,
yeah.
let's not draw the FTC's ire at this moment in time. And
Yeah, but it is very much something where I feel like like again like because the FTC is not usually like an instrument of going after this. It's usually much more of an instrument of going after companies.
I
Yeah,
mean, I don't think they would necessarily even have to go after the states directly. They could go after the AI companies and say, AI companies do not follow this state law, or else you will be in trouble with us, basically, and then force the AI
right.
companies to decide which law they're following. Um,
Yeah, but it's like, but the thing is, like, if they don't go after the states, then it's like the states will still be like, cool, we're still gonna fine you, and unless the FTC goes after the states, then it's like they kind of get the companies will kind of get caught in I don't know,
yeah.
like
Then there has to be some crazy
a
lawsuit where they were like, well, the FTC says it preempts and the like
the Supreme Court will
appeal.
have to decide
Yeah.
it. Yeah, like it's going to go the same routes anyways, and so it's like, but again, it's like the Supreme Court, for as conservative as they are, and this is also one of those things where it's like the present administration versus like traditional Republican policies is very
Hmm.
weird because like traditional Republican like GOP like theory of government prefers state rights over national like legislation and regulation and stuff like that. It gets into like the deep hypocrisy of the current administration,
Hmm.
especially in the context of like state versus federal like regulation and government and all those sorts of things. So I like again like my personal read on this feels like nothing. It feels like a waste of time and energy. It feels like it's not going to really like change anything because again because I feel like the states that are you know willing to like go after AI companies with this kind of regulation.
Yeah, I don't think this holds constitutionally either, for
No,
sure. And
it
I don't
does
think that
not.
has like a lot of ground to stand on. Just the particularly interesting ground to stand on was the like
Yeah,
deceptive commerce thing, because
yeah,
that's so explicitly saying like the LLM's outputs are truthful, and if you
yeah,
modify them, that's deceptive, and just like basing that as like the core assumption here, which is so it's annoying to me because of how untrue it is that LLMs
yeah,
are truth to start with, and
yeah.
like they have a lot of that wording in this executive order on like U.S. regulation must prioritize truth, as if like things are prioritizing lying. Okay.
Yeah. No, like because yeah, I would be curious about like the terms and condition, like what the
Yeah.
terms and conditions of the LLMs have to say about truth in their output. Because yeah, it's like if the LLMs themselves are not claiming to be truthful in what they are presenting to their users, then this is such a moot point.
Yeah, I mean, like, true. Like, that's almost like not even the problem for me, though, where it's like,
Mm,
in the sense of like, okay, if it was outputting untruths, would that be illegal? Probably not, is one question. But the question of
hmm
like, are these laws forcing it to output untruths? It's like, I don't That's not what that is.
Yeah, like, yeah, it's like there are so many false assumptions underlying this executive order.
Yeah. So like this particular quote that keeps getting me is
Hmm.
that the laws may force AI models to embed DEI in their program and to produce false results. And which is just like, and then, but the United States' AI regulatory framework must prioritize truth. And that's like the implication there is that like the discriminatory outputs of the LLMs that have like
Hmm.
biased, racist impacts on people. Like if you had an LLM, for example, assessing resumes that are submitted to them, like government jobs or something like
Yeah.
that, and say that LLM has a bias in it such that Black people get less
Yeah.
interviews or something like that. Extremely likely to happen. The Colorado law, as stated, would make it not have to not do that. Basically, like measure it and make sure that there's not a differential treatment there.
Yeah.
And Trump's argument in this executive order, or maybe David Sax's, or whoever was actually writing the text of the executive order, is that Black people getting less interviews is true and normal, and if you change it, that's false. So,
Okay.
which is
No.
just so frustrating to me. Like, totally apart from like, is that a reason? Is that illegal to do? Question
Yeah.
of just be like, that's not at all what that law is doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
No,
just like the
it's
baked in assumption that any bias an LLM does is just like the real state
yeah.
of the
Well,
world.
and also like the baked in assumption that anything that's trying to encourage like diversity, equity, or inclusion is inherently false is like,
Yes.
yeah, like that because like, I feel like that's like really what's at the heart of this. And yeah, to
Hmm.
harken back to the first thing we ever talked about on this podcast is like this assumption that DEI is inherently not the factual state of the world. And then the thing is like also it's not even truthfulness, I feel like, that you're dealing with there. It's going back to the meritocracy argument.
Hmm.
It's like, oh, we are evaluating people for like, positions of employment. It's like there's not an objective truth there. That's not
Yeah.
an objective assessment you're doing. You are doing a subjective assessment at that point in time. And so like what you are really like, nagging on is the meritocracy of it. Is like you're basically saying
Yes.
it's like, oh, are you picking a candidate who is unqualified? And that's just looping right back to that like stupid anti-DEI argument that like that declares that it's like, oh, if they are DEI, then they must inherently be
Yes.
unqualified, which is, again, as we have discussed previously, that's a dumb premise. It just does not make sense, and it's not how DEI works.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. There's even like, I feel like there's even two levels of that, because there's like the assumption that the LLM is somehow doing a perfectly meritocratic assessment of
yeah,
these resumes and picking the most qualified people. And if Black people aren't getting in, for example, then that's because they're not qualified. Aspect, which is just stupid, because it's like, first
yeah,
of all, an LLM looking at people's resumes is never going to have a perfectly meritocratic like
no,
judgment, because no one looking at people's resumes can have a perfectly meritocratic judgment. That's just a physically impossible thing to do.
yeah,
Uh,
because everybody writes their resume differently, and like not all facts are presented in a
yes,
resume, and
exactly.
people lie on their resumes all the time.
Yeah, so like,
So it's like,
yeah,
yeah,
for sure. So like, there's that one level of it, and then there's the second level of it, which is like, people have proven that like, even presented exactly the same resume with, say, different names at the top, an
yeah,
LLM will evaluate it differently. Long time ago, but one of the biggest ones actually came out of Amazon doing resume reviews and
mm,
saw that female engineers with exactly the same resume got passed forward less often than male
yeah,
ones.
yeah,
Just like
yeah,
the same resume, different names at the top, because
hmm,
it just built that bias into the model, and it has
yeah,
nothing to do with the facts of the thing that is presented. And like,
yeah. And I think they've also replicated that result with like names that read as foreign. So it's like if
mhm,
somebody has like a Hispanic last name versus like a European last name, which is not like a non-Hispanic European last name, because Spain isn't Europe, guys. Anyways, but yeah, like I think
yes,
they've done that exact same test on it, where it's like if we give like them a like quote unquote, and I'm using the biggest air quotes in the world here,
yes,
neutral last name versus giving it a like you know a quote unquote foreign last name, it's like it will judge them
Yeah.
differently in the same way. So
Yeah.
it's
I
like,
think yeah, I think Bloomberg did a lot of experiments on ChatGPT
yeah,
here too. I forget if it was specifically in resumes, but swapping in a lot of different names and seeing how it responded differently. And like,
yeah,
there are biases. They aren't always necessarily the ones that you would expect. I think the Bloomberg one had some interesting results, but it's like
hmm
just the name can change it. So it's
yeah,
clearly not just like pure objective meritocracy.
no.
Like,
Well, because it's trained off the internet. Because,
yes.
like, again, like these LLMs have been trained, a lot of them off of like Reddit and the internet, and because
Mm-hmm.
they've been scraping web pages, and that's how they read their information. And so they're inherently biased by the data set that they are trained on. It's a garbage
Yes.
in, garbage out system, you know? It's like it doesn't change the factuality of like what gets put into it. So if you feed an LLM non-factual information, it's not going to suddenly start spitting out the truth, you
Yes.
know?
Yeah. Yep. Yes. Back to the point of like, it's not a magical truth machine. Like, you
No,
cannot
it's
put in
not.
a whole bunch of information and like it
Yeah.
somehow distills the
Yeah,
abstract truth from it, even like beyond the level of information that it has access to. Like, that's
exactly.
impossible. It's impossible,
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah, it's like if you fed an LLM only flat earther content, if you only fed an LLM on people who believe the world is flat and then asked it if the world was round, I've got news for you on how that LLM is going to answer because it's going to tell you the world is flat.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. So
yeah.
yeah. So yeah, there's a lot to hate about this executive order, but that was the one
Yeah.
that really got me, was the
hmm
arguments that LLMs are true and we need to just be hands off and let them be true, and
Yeah,
any
no.
intervention in it is false. And it's like, come on, guys.
No. Yeah, it's just it's such a inherent misunderstanding of the technology that we're working with, but also just like such a stupidly inherent bias against anything DEI at all. So,
Yep.
yeah,
So yeah, that's that one. Fun,
yeah,
fun
fun,
times.
fun times.
We'll have to see if they decide to actually release anything like this executive order after it's gotten all this press. The other thing is that here, like, we were talking before about, hey, David Sachs, have you actually made any federal AI legislation?
hmm
It does actually say he will do that in this executive order. Um,
Be fun to
uh,
see.
he will come up with the federal, like, overarching legislation
Regulation. Yeah.
regulation.
Yeah. No, it'll be fun to see if he like if after all this negative feedback that actually like is an executive order that gets signed, because
Hmm.
we all know how sensitive Trump is to people saying nasty things about what he does. Let's go.
So Cloudflare was down a lot of this past Tuesday, and took down a lot of big sites, including like X and Reddit and ChatGPT and a bunch of other stuff. Something I was reading that thought it was funny that Elon Musk during the AWS outage was being like, Signal has a hard dependency on AWS and it was down on AWS, and that's terrible, and like
hmm
blah blah blah. And someone at that time pointed out that X Twitter had a hard dependency on Cloudflare and would be taken down if Cloudflare went down. So, which it did.
Which it did.
So, proving that he's not any better off there.
No.
A lot of interesting discussion about how like the downdetector.com website was also taken down by Cloudflare because
Oh, because it's on.
while they have a lot of redundancy, like, they don't have redundancy around Cloudflare. And
hmm
basically the pragmatic engineer talked to them a little bit. It's like, that's because it would be way too much work to basically rebuild that everything Cloudflare does for them in another way, or too
Yeah.
expensive. Because you basically would have to have a whole another CDN that's just idle most of the time that you're paying for, or you would have to like
hmm
rebuild all of their bot detection.
Yeah.
It's really expensive in one way or another, and not worth it for the amount of time that Cloudflare is down, which
Yeah.
is not very
Like,
often. So,
I'm like aware of like Cloudflare's like grasp on the internet, because like for a while there I was working with like CloudFront, which is the
mhm.
AWS CDN, and like their attempt to kind of like make a dent in it, and like a lot of times and we were having conversations. It's like, no, yeah, like Cloudflare and Akamai were really just like the big players, and CDNs are one of those things that are very sticky. Like storage is also sticky, where it's like once you get your data stored in a certain service, it's a pain in the butt to kind of pick it up and move it. And the same thing is true of a CDN. Like once you get your CDN all configured, it's very, very time intensive and very, very like onerous to just like, okay, but what if we pick it up and move it to another one? And it's just like, no, companies aren't really inclined to do that.
Yeah. So yeah, there's all that's sort of the interesting stuff about the specific things. I will say, I always say CloudFront instead of Cloudflare. Not always, but sometimes. So if I happen to say CloudFront at some point in this podcast, I mean Cloudflare.
We mean Cloudflare. We're not talking about CloudFront because CloudFront went down when AWS went down, so that's not this.
Yes. Too many names that have cloud in them.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the interesting thing I want to talk about was their postmortem on like exactly what happened. We can talk about the technical details about exactly what happened a little bit, but then I also wanted to talk about like the process that the company went through that allowed them to post this postmortem, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
So like briefly, without going into too much technical depth, because people can go read their postmortem if they want to. Apparently, it took longer than expected for them to identify what the issue was because they originally thought it was a DDoS attack. And the reason they thought that is that it would go up and down. Basically, they would get a whole bunch of errors and then it would be fine for a little while. And it would go get a bunch of errors and then be fine for a while, which doesn't really imply an internal system issue because, like, why would it recover in that case? That's weird. But the specific sort of sequence of events that happened made that happen. And like anytime you have like a big outage in a normally very available system like this, it's always a very weird sequence of events that make it happen and super interesting to see.
Yeah.
So like in this case, so simplifying it to some extent, basically the original change that triggered it was basically a permissions change to some of their databases because they were trying to sort of tighten permissions to the database such that people didn't have access to it by default. And the course of that permissions change had some unintended effects in terms of how some of their sort of like feature files were generated. Basically, they have a bot detection system and it's an ML system and it has a basically set of features that it looks at when it's trying to determine what the bot is. And that's stored in a certain database. And there's supposed to be 60 of them. And it's basically hard fails if there's more than 200 of them. In ways that perhaps it should have been able to recover better from, but no one was expecting it to suddenly have that many because like that's how many it has. But like it duplicated them and so it ended up with more than 200. And so this feature file is updated every 5 minutes. But the thing is, it's updated every 5 minutes by some process on a cluster that runs. And the cluster had sort of rolling updates for the permission update. So depending on which actual server ran the update to generate the feature file at that 5 minutes, it may or may not have gotten the bad update by that point. So sometimes it would push out a bad file to everyone, and then the next time it ran in 5 minutes, it would generate the good one again and then replace it with the good one. And then the next one might like basically coin flip based on how much of their database cluster had gotten the bad permissions update at the time. So that's what caused the sort of super weird up and down behavior that they saw that they had to try and debug. But they got there eventually, and they got a fixed version of the file out, and then did some cleanup, and eventually got things back up. And that took like 2 or 3 hours, I think. Let me have some actual time on. The outage lasted 6 hours, and took 2.5 hours to figure it out, and then some amount of time to actually fix it. And then less than 24 hours after it was resolved, they had this very detailed postmortem blog post up, which is super fast because normally in Amazon or AWS, you would call it a COE, basically, of going through what went wrong. Let's do our 5 whys. Let's identify everything. Let's figure out what's going wrong. And that process takes a while. And most of it is not posted publicly most of the time. So it's super interesting to have Cloudflare have this explanatory thing up extremely quickly. And how did that happen?
I do think like when there is an outage, AWS is in the habit of at least posting like an abbreviated or like some summary sort of like this is what went wrong.
There's usually some like here's what happened, but not at the depth that this blog post is, which is going into like exactly what happened and where and why and how they figured it out. There's a lot of graphs and things like that. So it's like in a lot of technical depth, much more technical depth than is normally standard for just like there is an malform configuration change, which is about the level that you would usually get from someone.
Yeah,
Where it's just
yeah.
like,
Malformed how? Configuration change where? It's like, yeah.
yes, yeah, and like that you could describe this that way, but just like showing how this happened and how it took them that long to fix is, I think, super interesting as an engineer, but also super interesting that they posted it. And so how they did this, the CEO actually posted a summary on Hacker News about how this happened, which is basically like he did it. He stayed up late with his ex CTO and board member, and his son, and their chief legal officer. So like the three of them hung out at his house and ate sushi and/or burritos, and like the team, the engineering team that had working on it had already sort of written up a Google Doc of like, here's what happened, play by play. And so they went through and tried to write this public facing blog post for it. And occasionally they had some questions and they pinged people in the Google Doc and they got answers and they updated it. And then they read it a few times and they were like, great, cool. And then they posted it basically. So I think the level of like involvement and understanding from the CEO doing it, in the sense that like he was actually there sitting and drafting it. He was in their Lisbon headquarters apparently, so it was after hours already in most places, but it was a fairly reasonable time for them to still be there, including the young son of the ex CTO. So they did that, and he like, I think that's super interesting, and I think good ownership in the Amazon leadership principle, being like, yeah, I'm literally going to write up this blog post and then I'm going to post it because I'm the CEO and I can decide, basically.
Yeah. It's like, I don't need to ask. I'm sure he probably like put it through his like PR people or something, but yeah, like it's honestly like, I feel like we need more CEOs like that. Like, it's one of those things where it's just kind of like, I'm like, that actually like makes me feel so much better about Cloudflare as a company, because it's just like, yeah, it's like, wow, you actually have a CEO who's like been in the weeds, understands the like the aspects of like what your service does. And it's like, and I feel like there are so many CEOs these days, Elon Musk, who could not actually explain to you in good technical terms what their service is or what their product does. And it's like, and I feel like honestly, it's like, I feel like you shouldn't be allowed to run a company if you can't give sure, you could ask for support, but if you can't like give a competent deep dive into what your company does and the product you sell, I feel like you should be disqualified from being a CEO. It's like, I'm sorry. It's so endemic of like, that's how you make really stupid mistakes. Like, I'm just like, I'm like weirdly reminded of was a post that was going around Tumblr about like the Yahoo CEO who bought Tumblr was like, we're going to turn Tumblr into the next PDF. And everybody in Yahoo, even Yahoo employees were like, what does that mean? It's like, that makes no sense. And it's just like, yeah, it does make no sense, because Tumblr is a visual social media platform. It is not a document like format or anything like that. So it's like, yeah, I don't know. It's like, it's so admirable. It's like, it's one of those things I'm just like, I wish we could see more of that. I feel like part of it is aided and abetted by the fact that Cloudflare is like a very directed company. It's not like it like, they kind of have a really huge market share on CDNs, but CDNs are the only thing that they do. And so it's like, or like most of the only thing that they do.
Yeah, I actually didn't know they did more than that lately, but on one of my jobs, I've been doing some stuff where they have basically a lot of AWS stuff, like where they have workers and they have like queues and basically all of the basic stuff you need to just like host your whole single page app on Cloudflare, like you would on Vercel or something like that.
but still, it's like, it's AWS without being attached to Amazon. So it's like, it's still a more directed company than AWS is, because AWS isn't its own company. So yeah.
And they definitely still have a lot less offerings than AWS, which I would say is a good thing, because AWS has too many offerings.
No, way too many. No, like, I always like to tell the story about how like when I first got hired at AWS, like in my orientation, like my Amazon orientation, there was a little part of it where our leader was like, okay, it's like, it's like, name an AWS service for me. And I think somebody was like RDS. And like the guy was like, you probably could have said any 3-letter acronym and I would have believed you. And I'm just like, yeah, it's that bad. And it's like, and that was back when like, that was back before DynamoDB was launched. That was very early days of AWS. I want to say that was in like 2012 or 2011. Like, so it's like,
Like,
It's
especially
worse.
if you
It's
make
so much worse.
especially if you make the third letter S, and that narrows down the scope of things pretty substantially. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, they do a lot of
But yeah.
stuff. So like
Mhm.
I agree. Like between this and between the sort of like content Independence Day, whatever stuff that they did a while ago in
Mhm.
terms of like we want to stand up against people doing badly behaved crawlers and that kind of stuff. I have Matthew Prince is the CEO of Cloudflare. I heard him talk about on a podcast at the time and really appreciated how he was talking about it and basically being like, yeah, like there's a major problem here for content creators, and we're in a position to
Mhm.
be someone who takes action on it, and therefore I'm taking action. So
Yeah.
I have a lot of respect for his leadership from these two incidents.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's very, very heartening things to like to read and to see, and it's like good job like modeling. It's like good behavior from a CEO in an era when it seems like CEOs are just doing a really good job of being terrible at their jobs.
I'll read out some of what he actually said about writing this document,
Hmm.
which is I texted John Graham Cumming, our former CTO and current board member, whose clarity of writing I've always admired. He came over, brought his son, parenthetical, to show that work isn't always fun, in quotes. Our, our chief legal officer, Doug, happened to be in town. He came over too. The team had put together a technical doc with all the details, a TikTok of what had happened and when. I locked myself in a balcony and started writing the intro and conclusion in my trusty BB Edit text editor. John started working on the technical middle. Doug provided edits here and there on places where we weren't clear. At some point, John ordered sushi, but from a place with limited delivery selection options, and I'm allergic to shellfish, so I ordered a burrito. The team continued to flesh out what happened. As we'd write, we'd discover questions. How can a database permissions change impact query results? Why were we making a permission change in the first place? We asked in the Google block. Answers came back. A few hours later, we declared it done. I read it top to bottom out loud for Doug, John, and John's son. None of us were happy. We were embarrassed by what had happened, but we declared it true and accurate. I sent a draft to Michelle, who's an SF. The technical teams gave it a once-over. Our social media team staged it to our blog. I texted John to see if he wanted to post it to Hacker News. He didn't reply after a few minutes, so I did. That was the process. It's just
Yeah,
like, yeah, you could just do that.
you can do that. Yeah. It's like that's actually like a pretty good process, you know? It's like you covered all the points that really needed to be covered. It's like good on you. So,
Yeah. And especially like to make the comparison to Amazon again, Jassy has written a lot about there being too much frost on Amazon. And even
yeah.
Bezos, before he left as CEO, talked about like stop process from becoming the thing. And I think there are too many
Mhm.
processes at Amazon. And like you
Yeah.
have to be careful about like when process is helpful and when it is not helpful. And sometimes you're just like,
Mhm.
okay, some really disastrous thing happens and we need to get a communication up as soon as possible. And I'm just gonna make it happen. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I part of, like, what like, the big Amazon layoffs that happened recently is you get, like, a director level or somebody who wanted to get promoted but didn't have enough scope of business to get promoted,
yes,
and so they would just, like, bring in people to bloat their scope of business and then ditch it
yeah,
once they got their promotion, and it's just kind of like, yeah, like, you can see how Amazon would wind up in a situation where it's like there's more process than needs to be, and so
yes.
it's like, yeah, it's like maybe what if consider that you got like you trimmed some of that process and started behaving a little bit more like an efficient business, you know? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, I can verify that that's the case because there is a lot of just like you can't get promoted to, for example, L7 as a manager unless you manage managers, basically, which means you
Yeah,
need to have
yeah.
enough people under you to have managers that you're managing,
Mhm.
and so, like getting promoted to director, even more so, you need more scope than that. So it's like you
Mhm.
either have to just like make up scope basically and bloat
Yeah.
your org, or take things over from other people, which is hard and it becomes like increasingly hard as like Amazon really has enough to do most of the stuff that it's doing at this point.
Mhm.
When it was growing like 2x every year, that made a lot more sense because it's like, okay, we opened an entire like new org to do Amazon video. Like, sure, there's like a bunch of
Mhm.
new scope for people to come in and do new things and grow, and that makes sense. But I think
Right.
that kind of method for a growing company where there's way more things to do than there are people to do it does not work at a company where you need to be doing the things that you need to do efficiently.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. No, yeah. Agreed on that.
yeah. And then everyone talks about how it's AI, and it's like, well, that too, but like
Yeah.
AI does not solve the organizational problems, which I think are the larger issue. So,
Yeah, yeah. The organizational problems definitely seemed not an AI driven and definitely like chasing promotion is like kind of like a thing that Amazon would attract people who wanted to do that chasing promotion, but it's also like you just need to admit that you can't have more people over a certain level at one point in time. It's like at a certain point in time, it's just kind of like, hey, you've hit your ceiling, unfortunately, and it's like you can kind of sit and do a really good job and, maybe get paid a little bit more every year, but not necessarily like build prestige, or you can just like leave the company, do something else. And it's like, I don't know, it felt like so many people were drinking the Kool-Aid that they didn't really want to take the like leave the company, do something else option. And
Yes.
also like like was it like what did they call it? It's like it was attrition, but it was like a specific kind of attrition that
Unregretted attrition,
yes,
or
unregretted attrition. That I feel like that wasn't happening enough.
yeah,
So, which is a weird way to like say it and look at it, but it's like, So yeah, but like I don't know. It's like, yeah, like the long and short of it is just like I feel like Amazon was driving itself into the ground for a while, and I feel like the pandemic kind of in a way delayed the inevitable by like, giving the retail business like a lot to kind of prop itself up for a couple of years, but I feel like it's really like this is kind of the come to Jesus moment in a way of like, hey, you have you have gotten too big for your britches. You like expanded in such a way that is unsustainable and untenable, and like, yeah, you have a lot of really bad processes that are in place that are just making it difficult to actually do work. So,
yeah, and it
yeah.
really needs like people to come in and have some amount of like strategic direction leadership, which is like
Yeah.
is a flaw in a lot of places, not just
Oh,
Amazon, but a
yeah.
lot of places
Yeah.
in general, where it's like Google, I think, is even more infamous for this for Amazon. If you talk about like how many Google chat products there have been over the course of the years,
Yeah.
which is just like
Yeah.
uh someone needed to come in and be like, okay, this is our chat strategy, this is what we're doing, and then
Mhm.
commit to it and get it done and kill everything that was not aligned with that strategy. But like that
Yeah.
takes some like very strategic and
Well, like it takes
hands-on management.
yeah, and then
Yeah.
like it takes like um conviction,
Yeah.
Weirdly, I feel like that's something a lot of people working at the Fang style tech places lack is conviction in a lot of in a lot of different ways. You need to actually kind of maybe stand up for what you think is the right thing to do. Um
Hmm.
strategically, ethically, in a lot of different ways. I feel like part of it also is like the cult of personality around CEOs, where it's just like, oh no, but if the CEO doesn't want to do that, I don't want to like say something, and it's just like you should,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
really should,
Yes.
know.
Or even if we're talking about
Mhm.
Amazon, your SVP or your VP, I
Yeah,
definitely like
yeah.
a lot of my problem my last couple of years at Amazon was not really with like the top level leadership. The top level leadership I thought was actually had pretty good judgment on stuff. The problem
Mhm.
was everyone in between me and them
Yeah.
where who didn't want to say no to them basically. And so the top level leadership who heard about our project like for an hour once every 6 months was making the best judgments that they could based on the information we provided them. But like we have to
Mhm.
provide them the correct information and like be willing to stand up for what we think and not just listen to the thing they said off the cuff one time or like anyway. So like I think there's a lot
Yeah.
of that sort of like not sycophancy, but like
A little bit of
a little
sycophancy
bit
though.
sycophancy. Like yeah, and
Mhm.
unwillingness to have a perspective that goes against leaderships. Even if leadership like would be fine with you having that perspective, which I think was true in this case. And like the few times that we did be like, actually we can't do this, or actually we think we should do this, it went fine. Like
And then
like
everybody just forgot that the next time they needed to disagree.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like, fine might be a little bit of an exaggeration. It was not like they were happy about things like we are nowhere near this launch and it's going to take us at least another year to hit the date that is coming up in 3 months now or something like that.
Yeah.
But like they would rather hear that if it's true than not hear that if it's
Yeah,
true.
yeah. No, it's like, what is it? No, nobody likes a watermelon green status, where it's like, oh yes, we're green until you cut into it and you see it's been red all along.
Yes.
It's like, yeah, tangentially it reminds me of like, and this is like speculation. Like I don't know how much of this is factual, so I'm gonna kind of caveat it with that. But like, because I was at Wizards during the time of like the OGL scandal that happened with Dungeons and Dragons, which if people don't
Yep.
know, the OGL was like the open gaming license, which basically allows free use of Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition base rules for making like supplements and, like doing kind of spin-offs and things like that. And it's a very big part of why there's so many like, third-party created content that gets sold for Dungeons and Dragons, which is really a good thing. But yeah, when I was there, they were talking about like, oh, well, what if we updated that? And part of updating it was a clause to require licensing fees on use of D&D content if creators made a certain amount of money. And like the internet blew it out of proportion a little bit. But also from the inside, what I heard was that it was just a question that the CEO had asked of like, oh, is this a thing we could do? And everybody ran with it without stopping and saying, no, maybe we shouldn't. And it's like,
Yeah.
The importance of saying no to your CEO when they ask a question,
Yes. Like similarly, even like one of the last like conversations I had after I had said I was quitting Amazon with like one of the L7 engineers who recently joined the team and was talking to me about my perspective on like what had gone wrong. Because this was also after I was proved right and the whole project was going to get like mostly shut down because it turned out that I was right about all the things that I was saying about the things that was going wrong. So everyone was like, wait a minute, maybe we should see what Carly thinks about this. So, but yeah, like he was like, so do you think the problem really was like our VP asking if we could launch this product? And I was like, I don't think so, because he was just asking the question and we could have said no, and no one wanted to say no to him. But like, my perspective, as far as I could tell from every interaction I had with him, is that was just a question. He just wanted to know if it was possible to launch it by that date. And like the answer was extremely no. Like we were like, not even just like we would have to move fast and break things level of things. We were still in the research phase of knowing the technology even worked, basically. And they were like, could you launch a product that uses this by like September or whatever? And so like, no, like, will we even know if it works hypothetically by September? Questionable, like depends. So that was where it was at. And like the answer should have been no, like by all reasonable standards. And people said this specifically to my face. They were like, well, we can't just say no. And it's like,
yes, you can.
You can though. He's asking the question because he wants to know the answer to the question.
If he like knew the answer was yes, he wouldn't ask a question.
Yes. So yeah.
God.
Like I understand like there's some level of intimidation and people pleasing. Yeah. And especially for like roles where that is mostly what you do, which is like business development, which is a lot of the people I was working with. Yeah. Like I understand like you could just interpret that differently, but that's not what it meant.
Yeah.
It was a real question. He just wanted to know the answer to.
Like if he had said, I need you to launch this by this day, that's a totally different situation than asking, can we launch this by this day? But I feel like part of it also though, a little bit of it being a bit of a both sides issue where I feel like a lot of times like people at the top might be a little ignorant of the effect that they have upon their direct reports in terms of like, I think I'm just asking a question for information and everybody around me is taking it as a directive. Maybe I should adjust how I speak.
I was in fact talking to someone who was an ex-Amazon exec at my networking club a few weeks ago who was like, yeah, I had to learn that because one time I was just like suggested something offhand and people came back to me 2 months later being like, we did the thing. And I was like, what thing? So just being aware of the impact that you can have at that level is important. But also I think people should have their own convictions and things. It
is like, it's not an even split, but it is definitely like there's communication is a two-way street kind of thing.
Let's move on and talk about consensus in VC sort of broadly. And we've talked about this a little bit before. I think I cut some of it from one of our episodes when I went on the longer rant about it, but I've mentioned it at least a couple times, which is that VC is theoretically venture capital. It's a venture. It's something that is unproven and experimental, and you're funding something that's super risky and out there, and is building something new that no one has ever seen, and so it can become super big potentially.
Yeah.
So like that's what the definition of venture capital is / should be / was. Yeah. And there's been a lot of discourse lately of like, as VC has grown and become more of an industry, a much bigger industry with a lot more money in it, it has become less of that. And there's been a lot more just sort of movement towards funding what everyone agrees is the next big thing.
Yeah.
And especially if you're like Andreessen Horowitz, which runs like $1 billion funds, there's just like, there's no way to put that in tiny non-consensus ventures, basically. Like they do
Mhm.
some of that. They have some early stage stuff going on where they will invest in very early stage companies, but a lot of it is just dumping billion more dollars into the clear winners at this point. So I thought from this week, this post called "Build What's Fundable" was talking about Y Combinator in particular, which I don't know if you're familiar with Y Combinator at all.
Very passingly familiar, so you
Yeah,
could explain it to me and probably I learned
sure.
something.
Yeah, and for anyone who doesn't know who's listening, Y Combinator is basically like the prototypical startup accelerator, like the most prestigious, one of the first, and the one that is still like the most popular for people to join. And Sam Altman came out of it. He ran Y Combinator for a while, not originally, but he like took it over for a while before he took over OpenAI.
Mhm.
And basically, like they started out focused a lot on like it's not actually that easy to get into startups and how do we help people like kick themselves off. And Kyle Harrison, who's the author of this post, posts the request for startups, the first, I don't know if it was the first one, but the request for startups that Y Combinator posted in 2014. And
Mhm.
basically that's here's some problems that we're thinking about that we think are under focused on at this point, and we would love to see people who have ideas in this space apply
Mhm.
is the request for startups. And you can go look at the cash version of this, but it's a lot of stuff where it's like energy, robotics, biotech, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, food, water, education, internet infrastructure, government, like a whole lot of like categories of things. And they have the 15th thing on this list is called 1 million jobs, and it's basically like we want to see companies that could generate 1 million jobs, and how there's
Mhm.
not actually that many companies in the US that have done that. It's basically like Walmart and eventually Amazon, because like what business models can employ 1 million people and what jobs do people do when things are increasingly automated and bring that unique human value to it, etc.
Yeah.
So he's contrasting that sort of like initial YC request for startups with the current one, which is very much just like a list of the most popular things that people are talking about. Video generation as a primitive, infrastructure for multi-agent systems, native enterprise software, using LLMs instead of government consulting. So just like all of the AI buzzwords, basically.
Yeah.
And they talk about the first 10-person, $100 billion company. So he says, like, on first glance, this feels maybe similar, but it's one, the exact opposite, employ as few people as possible because AI. And two, this is basically saying the quiet part out loud. What problem will you solve? Who cares? But a lot of VCs are talking about how crazy some of these revenue per employee numbers are getting. So, do that. Um, so basically, it is just the movement from to whatever extent you think startups ever were innovating and like addressing real problems in the world. They were doing that more so before than they are now.
Yeah.
And talking about that. And a lot of interesting stuff in this thing. He has some graphs where it's just like the age of YC founders has declined from 29 to 30 to 25. It's a lot more people who went to elite schools. It's a lot more people who did YC companies before. It's a lot more people in the Bay Area. So it's just like exactly just the people who you would expect to do it and making it into a machine to get money.
Yeah.
Um, and I think one thing that I think about a lot here is related to this post that the Martin Casado, who I think is a AC16Z partner, Andreessen Horowitz partner, posted. The idea that non-consensus investing is where the alpha is actually quite dangerous in the early stage. Follow-on capital tends to be more and more consensus aligned. So explaining what he's saying here a little bit. So like alpha and beta are in sort of like investing terms. Alpha is uncorrelated gains. So basically, that is not
Mm.
just like general market growth. Beta is you get gains from general market growth. So if you own like a hedge fund, you're looking for alpha by bringing a bunch of people who can pick genuinely good companies that are going to outperform the market. So is looking for alpha. So versus beta is just like you'll get this amount of games, just like the average market, basically.
Yeah, like an index fund kind of
Yeah.
thing.
So the alpha here is talking about like finding the companies where you'll get an advantage over what everyone else is going to do. And he's
Yeah.
saying that the way you do that is not find the companies that are not what people agree on, because
Mhm.
those companies can't get more money, basically, which is the thing that I ran into a lot fundraising myself, or like heard people discuss while fundraising myself a lot, which is like, okay, if you're an early stage investor, like say I run a tiny like micro VC fund and I have like $10 million that I'm going to invest in whatever 100 startups, really, really early stage ones. If I invest in a startup that I think is really cool and I give them 50K, but no one is ever going to give them any more money, all they
Mhm.
have done is spend my 50K and then die.
Yeah.
because 50K is not enough money to actually make the business successful.
No.
So as I'm investing, I am not only thinking about, do I think this business can succeed, but will the next stage's investors think this business will succeed?
Yeah.
And if I don't think this business can get a Series A investment or a seed investment, depending on what level we're talking here, maybe I don't invest in them, because it's just like, it doesn't matter how much I believe in them. Like I don't have enough money to make it a successful business. Like I'm not investing at that level,
Yeah.
more or less. So I think that's an underappreciated effect in VC, is like this sort of self-reinforcing loop where
Mhm.
there's a certain set of things that investors invest in, and everyone knows what those are generally. And if you're funding things at the early stages, you want to fund the things that will be able to get more funding, because
Yeah, because otherwise you're just lost your money.
yeah, and so because perhaps more than anything else, including like the actual business itself, that's what determines the success of the business, right? Because like in the limit, if you give people money for long enough and they pivot enough, they're probably going to get to something successful. Like
Yeah.
even if their business model is not that great at the start. But no matter how good your business model is, if you don't have enough money to build it, it will die.
Yeah.
So the sort of like the funding angle is perhaps the most predictive of signals you could be looking at the early stage, is will this company be able to raise money? Which is just really unfortunate, because then you get these sort of like incredible feedback loops that drive everyone to consensus. So that's the thing I think about.
Yeah. No, it
um
definitely like I don't know. It's to kind of loop back for like for people who seem to cry meritocracy at every, available opportunity. It feels very much like the venture capital like stage has just become no longer really a meritocracy. And I
mhm,
feel like again, not to bring OpenAI up again, but we always rag on OpenAI. But just the fact that like the Y Combinator post is now just like so completely like, are you doing AI? We would like you to talk to you if you are doing AI and give you money to do AI. I feel like at that point in time, it's like you're not judging these companies based on the merit of what they're doing. You're not judging them based on like the presumed success of their business model or like, the value that you think the product will provide or even the viability of the product in the market. It's like you're in this weird detached criteria where you're looking at the viability of the business in this investor market. You're not even looking at like, do people want to buy the thing that this company is producing? You're looking at, does somebody else with money want to give this company money? It's such a weird evolution of like, because I don't think it's even really like it's capitalism. But I don't think it's really capitalism anymore in a weird way,
mhm,
because it's like because like it's like, and especially because of the fact that, yeah, like a startup inherently, by nature of being a startup, is not in its initial phase producing a product. It is not, like making anything to sell. It's like they're in the prototyping phase. They're in the like, initiation phase. It's like they're just kind of putting on a show and dance for investors. It just feels so weirdly detached from like a market economy. This is just kind of like it's the billionaire class throwing money at each other in a
yes,
really like very weird obnoxious way where if you didn't have the luxury to be born into one of these weird rarefied circles or like have attended these very specific schools or know the right people, it's like you're never going to see this money. And it's
mhm,
like and you're never going to see any benefit from these companies either, because again, it's like it is not actually the products that they are producing as much as it is like their ability to appeal to like the billionaire investors. So it's just
Yeah.
like, I don't know.
And
It's like it feels so bad. Yeah.
it does feel bad. Yes. I feel this bad all the time. But yeah, like even when they are
Yeah.
producing a product, which like sometimes they do,
Mhm.
it's almost always just B2B SaaS. So it's like
Yeah.
building software for other businesses to buy that may or may not be helpful. Maybe sometimes it's helpful, but it's still just, it's very rarely like consumer products that are actually
Yeah.
improving the experience of many people in the world. But second of all, like can get worse than that. So people call this
Mhm.
post also calls out Cluely, which I don't know if you saw any of the stuff about at the time. That was
No.
the cheat on everything app, which founded
Oh.
by the guy who like got kicked out of Columbia after he used AI to cheat on a whole bunch of software
Oh
dev
my God.
interviews and then posted about it basically. So he's like,
Mhm.
yeah, I got an offer from Amazon and like a couple other places and I turned them all down and it was all just using my like HUD display chat GPT basically. So that allowed me to like look like I was paying attention while actually getting all my answers from AI. So
Oh my
Cluely is
gosh.
the company that he founded that does that for everything, not just coding interviews. And he did like a trailer video that was him using it on like a date and stuff like that to like hack knowing all
Oh
of the
my
answers to his
God.
date's questions and stuff like that. So that was a great one. And like their tagline, which they've since changed, I think, but was like cheat on everything.
Yeah.
To call back to, he got a lot of press as the guy who used AI to cheat on all his interviews.
Yeah.
But A16Z funded them. The one in this post is called Chat IDE, which they describe as the brain rot code editor. AI coding takes 1 to 5 minutes between prompts. Too long to ignore, too short to start something new. Chat integrates your brain rot, X, IG, Stake, Tinder, etc., into your agentic coding workflow and helps you manage your context switching. Less doom scrolling, more shipping. So the idea being that instead of like
So
tapping back and forth from VS Code to your social network browser and then reading for 5 minutes, but your code thing has been done in for a minute and losing time
yeah.
that way, it will swap you back and forth for you, basically.
Do your ADHD for you. Yeah, that's
Yes.
but also yeah, that's such a like that's such a weird little product that you have made for such a niche little group of people to consume. And yeah, it's what is it? I see here they've described this as slop startups. And I'm just like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, that seems like a slop startup indeed. So it's like you're premising this entire startup is premised on the idea that like a bunch of people will be using these AI bots, and like the underlying assumption of like AI coding is going to be a successful thing has not even yet been proved. You're just kind of like building on top of this like house of sticks and just being like, this is my big idea, never mind the fact that the foundation I'm standing on is twigs and they all seem to be shaking lately. So it's like,
Yeah.
what?
And
Yeah.
like even beyond that, like if you assume all of that is sound, like I
Hmm.
actually have a workflow where I could see this being, I don't know if useful is the word that I would use, is
Yeah.
still is the thing where it's like I do lose time looking away from Claude Code while it runs stuff and I go look at
Yeah.
something else and then I come back 10 minutes later. I'm not sure that like having something switch back and forth for me every 90 seconds is like the solution. I
Yeah.
feel like we have to like come up with some better workflows here that are not look at Twitter for 90 seconds every 5 minutes of my workflow. Like that
Right.
sounds bad. That seems like a bad way to do that.
Yeah.
They describe it as slop startups. They describe it as like encouraging sin also, which is like, yeah, like maybe we shouldn't just
Hmm.
do that. Related, the 404 Media article from a while ago that I just put in our doc also is talking about some of the slop startups that were in their recent speedrun batch.
Hmm.
They wrote a whole article about one that was basically like they say a click farm that sells synthetic influencers to AstroTurf with whatever product or service you want to credit against social media, despite that being a clear violation of every social media platform policy on inauthentic behavior. Which is
Yeah.
just like that's explicitly against the terms of service of everything. You're just like, yeah, let's break all the rules. And then
Yeah.
yeah, A16Z is like, yeah, let's fund that. But then they had a whole bunch of other AI slop startups also. And so it's
Hmm.
just like, yeah, there's a lot of that stuff, which is like you just gotta have an AI story and then you get money. And as long as you can
Yeah.
keep telling your story, you will keep getting more money. And does it matter if there's any product there that anyone actually wants? Not
No, not
really. Like
really. Yeah, it's like cool. That's such a like weird symbiotic relationship that's like you have to acknowledge that like these companies would not exist if it were not for, the funding that they're getting from A16Z or anyone else. It rankles because it's just kind of like businesses that should be allowed to fail in that way. If you don't have a viable business plan, if you don't have a viable underlying assumption of like what the product that you are building, a service you are providing, then you should die. It's just kind of like but that's also, it's part of the process. We were talking about entrepreneurship earlier. That's kind of like part of the thing. It's like you need to be willing to fail. And the fact that these like little parasitic companies are getting propped up by billionaires who don't care that they're unsustainable business models is just like, it's just so anathema to entrepreneurship. It's so like anathema to a market economy, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just like, and the fact that so much capital that is
Yeah.
just being concentrated in this like weird symbiotic relationship between these companies is just such a bad thing for the economy in general.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah.
Like going back to what you were saying about it not even really being capitalism. Like I think that's
Yeah.
true because it's not. Like there's no
No.
consumer making choices here that are like
Yeah.
the invisible hand of the market picking the right companies out of it. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah. There's not really supply and demand in action here. Yeah, it's like, what is this? It's not capitalism.
yes, or like the demand is the demand from investors for people to have a narrative that they can sell to other investors, and it's like that's not.
Yeah.
I don't think that was how this was intended to work, or
No,
how everyone
absolutely
really
not.
wants it to work. So,
Mm-mm. Yeah.
and like to that extent, like this is a VC who wrote this post. There are a lot of VCs who are talking about this being a bad thing because, for many VCs, they like to think the job of a VC is to help identify and support
Hmm.
good business ideas that are going to help change the world,
Yeah.
and like
Hmm.
find the innovative ideas that are going to like do new cool things for the markets in the world and solve
Yeah.
problems and etc. And like increasingly you must notice that that's not how it works. I think that's not always the case, and there are certainly some VCs who don't think about it as like I want to help people solve problems. They think about it as where is money to be made and how do I like make that
Yeah.
happen basically, and they just don't see past that. Like they don't think about how that's a bad thing. And I think that's how you end up with things like these slop startups, which is just like, oh yeah, this has all the right buzzwords in it. This is right in the Venn diagram of things that VCs care about right now. This will absolutely raise a second round, like etc.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as an individual VC, like if you were a junior partner at A16Z, for example, if you're a junior partner at a VC fund and you pick something that is a genuine outlier, like that people would not think is a good idea based on the common knowledge, and then it fails, you look bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas like if you pick the thing that everyone agrees is good and then it turns out it fails, everyone's like, well, you couldn't have done, basically. And so
Right.
like your career is mostly decided in the next like 3 years after you make that initial decision, and not even by like the ultimate outcome of that company, because that's too far down the line for it to matter. So
Right. Yeah, that is something also that like it kind of like I wonder about this is like I don't know as much about VC economics, but at some point in time, the return on investment has to come due of like, the VCs kind of getting money back for what they've invested into the company. And it's like, and I feel like with so many of these things being like just feeding into this ever growing bubble of like not just AI, but like this is almost like its own separate, like weird, like VC bubble, like that's kind
mhm.
of going on. At what point in time does these companies failing to turn a profit mean that these people are going to just lose all their money? It's like, or does that ever happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, it's not their money mostly.
That's
Like, if you're
true.
a venture capital fund, you have investors, you have limited partners in the fund
Yeah, yeah,
whose money it is actually, but they're not expecting to see their money for 10 years. Basically, most funds
yeah,
run on a 10-year life cycle, and what they will do is they will do like markups of the thing. So, like, if you raise a fund in say 2015, um, and then you go invest it in a bunch of companies. And then if those companies go on and raise new rounds at higher valuations, like they get more money in, you can mark up like where the fund is at. So like if I invested $1 million in this company at a $15 million valuation, and then they go raise more money at like $100 million valuation, then the percentage of that company I bought originally is now worth like whatever X more than it was
yeah,
before. And so you can mark up and be like, okay, the money that I invested is now worth blah. And like fund one is at a blah markup right now. Like
Mhm.
most of the things that you invested in are going to die. Like that's how the VC math works, is the assumption is 9 out of 10 things go to zero, and then one will more than 10x your money and make it worth it.
Yeah.
So as long as some of them still continue to raise more money and get markups at higher valuations, it still looks good. And like eventually you will get to the point where you have to return the fund. But like that's such a delayed indicator where it's just like
Mm.
16Z looks good now because they did really good in like their early funds, which were a long time ago.
Yeah.
So like if they're doing stuff now, that will not really come to a head for like another 10 years. So
Mhm.
when do you get your exit is the question. And as long as you get
Yeah.
some exits that are at high multiples, then it all works out. So
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely feels like we're not going to see the collapse of this for like another 10 years, but it still feels like it's going to collapse though. It's like what you've described is like, again, like you have to like, you predicate this on having a certain success rate. And I feel like at the point at which you are like not evaluating these based on their capability of producing a profit, I feel like your success rate is going to decline
yes,
precipitously, and it's
I
already a pretty small success rate, so you don't really have a lot to be eaten away at. So it seems like it's like they're setting themselves up for a 10-year failure.
yeah, but they don't have to worry about that now.
Yeah,
That's in 10
no,
years.
I know. What's this 10 years from now? Who cares? We'll find something else to prop ourselves up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or they'll find at least one of the companies that they can like pitch well enough
Hmm.
that they can exit and get out before the
Yeah,
dominoes fall,
it feels
basically.
kind of like a hot potato game. It's like who's going to be
Yeah,
left, it's
exactly.
like holding.
And like ideally, um, ideally for them, the answer is public market investors, right? Because if you pick for example, OpenAI with its high
Yeah.
$500 billion valuation and no profits currently, like, and they were talking about IPOing soon. Now they're like a real regular for profit company,
Yeah.
and that if they did that as soon as 2027, that would be still before they're making a profit. They could potentially IPO before that happens, and in that
Hmm.
case like people are probably still going to buy their stock because they're still like, as long as
Yeah.
they can coast on the hype out to the public markets such that public shareholders buy into it, then the
Hmm.
VCs can cash out and they're
Yeah.
done and they've succeeded. So
Yeah.
like you just got to get the hot potato far enough to like, IPO is the most end of end games, but there's also
Hmm.
just like getting acquired by some other big company. So just like you got to find someone you can convince to pick up the potato is the only
Yeah.
is
Yeah. It just it feels very Ponzi scheme. And it's so frustrating because it does feel very much like, they're banking on like the ignorance of, common investors.
Mhm.
It's like it's so scummy.
to to argue that I don't know about that, but to like take the other side about it, it's like it's not a total Ponzi scheme in the sense that like many of these companies are not slop companies. They're companies of
Yeah.
like people who really think that they're doing something and they're building something, and like even if it was hype at the beginning, if you keep pouring money into it, like probably
Mhm.
someone's gonna try and build something at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I am being very, like, distant, like, I'm not being very generous to a lot of
Yeah,
these companies, but I don't think I'm completely off the mark
no,
on
you're not.
this.
You're also
So,
not like there's just a lot of that in here, and it's like
yeah.
yes, but like I think the point there is like that can help prevent all of the dominoes from falling at some point, or like a whole house of cards of doing is like some of
Yeah.
these companies do actually become like real companies who are adding value to the world at some point. Like
Mhm.
there are companies that are doing things. Like
True.
it's not all necessarily pure hype because you can't even with like VCs get away all the time on pure hype. And
Yeah.
like there are some that have been more pure hype than others. Like we talked a little bit about Frank. There's FTX where it is just like it's just a Ponzi scheme. There's no
Yeah.
actual substance to it. But there's other
Yeah.
ones where it's like there is substance there, and is it like the best business possible if we had like a real meritocracy picking things at the entry point. Maybe not, but it's like it's a business, and if they have years and billions of dollars, they can probably figure it out. Like,
Yeah.
so like that can help it not completely collapse, which I don't know if that's better or worse, because that helps the whole thing kind of keep going. So
Yeah. I would argue, kind of just based on the conversation that we've been having, that it is a little bit worse in that regard. We shouldn't be like propping these up in this way. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't seem like it's a good sustainable business model. And it's like, yeah, maybe some of these are okay, but it's like the but is so big that it kind of overshadows any amount of like normal functional like goodness that's coming out of it. There's so much capital and time and energy that's being invested in building this slop.
yes,
And with the idea that we're going to be leaving like people's 401ks holding the bag at the end of this. And it's like, and that money, that time, that energy could have actually gone into making things that are more valuable for
yes,
society.
I was gonna say,
So it's like,
and leaving by the wayside anything that just like doesn't fit the mold of the things that people
right.
want to run through this machine, basically.
Yeah.
Because yeah, that's the big concern that people are having, is like anything that is actually innovative does
Right.
not get funded right now, because
Yeah.
if it's something that is non-consensus, is what they call it, it's
Hmm.
like it's hard to do that because people don't give you funding. um
Yeah.
so that it does have like that incentive to drive everyone through consensus. And I've seen like that happen very literally, of just like a founder who was building something that was around like
Hmm.
combining education with home elder care, and like, can you help people fund their college while they live in and be a caregiver? Like, great, cool, that sounds like
Yeah.
an interesting approach. No one's going to fund that. No one loves funding ed tech. No one likes funding that stuff. Like, it
Yeah.
involves people, and it's really hard and doesn't scale at SaaS multiples, so you're not going to get funding for that. And so
Yeah.
she stopped doing that, and now then she was like, actually, I'm going to do like a, how do we increase profit margins when you're running marketing campaigns startup, and that's going to work great now. And I'm like, that's so depressing.
It's very depressing. It's like, yeah, it's like concrete example of like, oh, I could have done something good for society, but no one wanted to invest in it. So I guess I'm just going to kind of like try to make more money for rich people.
But yeah, this is my disillusionment trying to run a startup for a while, is that I definitely had a vision of
Yeah.
people fund things that are good businesses that are going to improve the world. And no, I mean, like, so, again, some people do still try to do that, but it's so much more skewed towards this machine of like, how do you raise your next round, and what matches the thesis that's popular now, and things like that. That it's just actually innovative stuff is really actually very hard to do in this
Yeah.
current environment, and it doesn't even match up to like whatever you think of capitalism and the startup culture of like innovation driven by the venture investing and things like that. It's
Mhm.
not even working as described.
No,
So
it's really not.
yeah, because it's not meritocratically picking the things that are solving societal problems. It's picking the things that match
It's
consensus.
picking the hype. Yeah.
Yeah. So
So
yeah, that
it's become a popularity contest and not an actual like what's the greatest good for society thing.
yeah. And like and maybe popularity contest is enough, but just like a consensus sort of like
Yeah.
machine. There's a whole in group, and they pick the winners, and then those winners win because they picked them, not because they're good at picking winners. Which is the other thing about VCs that makes them hard to question this, because like they're along with, they want to think that they're picking the things that are solve problems or whatever. They want to think that their job is being good at picking the right things, basically,
Hmm.
to invest in. So they're picking the businesses that are eventually going to succeed. So if
Yeah.
they see that the businesses they're picking are eventually succeeding, they want to believe that's because they're good at it, and not because like their act of picking them is what made them succeed. Even
Yeah.
though there is a lot of that in there too, in that things don't succeed if they don't get funding. So
Yeah, it's a weird self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's not, like actually working as intended. It's just depressing.
yeah. To bring a bit of lighthearted humor to the end here, he also talks in this post about Mark Andreessen mocking the Pope, which he talked about last time,
Oh, yes.
and the Techno Optimist Manifesto. And he posts sort of like an excerpt that some people posted on Twitter
Hmm.
from this sort of like creative writing piece about every Bay Area house party. And I'm just going to read it because I think it's fun. So, yeah, he said, it sucks because I think I have the best job of anyone here. I started a new company that uses diphilic polymers for dam construction. Diphilic polymer is a new material that strengthens when it encounters water. You could just pour a truckful into a river and get a dam in a fraction of the time for half the price. You took a course that touched on diphilic polymer once, so for once you're not a total rube. Hey, I know a little about that. I thought it turned brittle and fractured below about 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Aren't you concerned that your dams might break during a cold spell? The dam guy looks at you blankly for a second. Then it's as if a light goes on in his eyes. Oh, I see. You're one of those people who thinks technology makes the world worse. You should read this great essay. It's called the Techno-Optimist Manifesto. You'll see that actually, throughout human history, technology has made the world better. I agree that technology is good in general, you say. I just thought that I heard this particular technology might shatter once temperature reaches 36 degrees Fahrenheit, and then it would flood anywhere downstream of the dam. I wish you could hear yourself, said the dam guy. It's like 100 years ago, people said we should use antibiotics because only God should be allowed to heal people. And then 50 years ago, people said we shouldn't use nuclear power because it might have meltdowns and cure us all. And now you're saying we can't make diphilic dams. Doesn't it worry you? You're part of this long line of people trying to hold back the Promethean spirit of the human race. I'm totally for the Promethean spirit, you say. It's just, yes or no, does diphilite shatter at 36 degrees Fahrenheit? So...
yeah.
Which is like, that's what it's like.
Yep.
Just the facts don't matter, only hype.
Only hype matters. Yeah.
Yeah. And just like that Mark Andreessen viewpoint from the Techno-Optimist Manifesto is just like, all technology is good. And if you doubt it in any way, then you're the enemy or whatever. It's like, no, there's some real reasons to be skeptical and want to be careful with things.
Right.
And like some of them are more subjective than something shatters at 36 degrees Fahrenheit, but there's a range, and like we should have the ability to discuss all of them, I think.
Yeah. And it is, in fact, like, it's so weird because it's like, that's the scientific method. How do you think you get technology without, like, testing and questioning things? Like, how do you think you arrived at the conclusion of, like, oh, you can, like, put this polymer in water and it strengthens? It's like, you didn't do that. It didn't just emerge from somebody's brain. They had to test it.
Yeah. Yes. We don't get technology by just trying everything forever with no guardrails and no like concern for consequences, and it just all works out eventually. Like that is definitely not how science works.
Absolutely not how science works. It's absolutely not how technology is developed.
I'm reading the conclusion of this Build What's Fundable post. And he talks a little about how the pursuit of scale has made slaves to incentives out of a broad swath of participants in tech. And I think it is important to think about what incentives are for things. Because I think incentives really drive outcomes, as we talk about, as lots of people talk about, where it's just like, okay, if you have built a structural incentive, such as like for an early stage investor, your incentive is to fund the things that will be funded in the next stage, not the ones that will be successful eventually, because like those two things are not necessarily correlated. And the ones that get you your money back are the ones that have funding next. So like that's the incentive there. And like the question of like, A, what are the incentives and can we change them such that they don't drive bad outcomes? And then B, on an individual level, can we be aware of the incentives and still have principles and conviction in face of them? I think are like the two important things there. Because I think in structuring systems, we can think about incentives and be like, if we structure it this way, is it going to lead to these bad outcomes? Can we change it? But then also, as a person who has conviction, you don't have to just do what you feel is expected of you or what is incentivized. You should be able to have the ability to stand up and say no to people about things. Either because like they're factually false or because your principles are against them or like any other reason. You should be able to do that. Like that's an important part about how systems work, is that that people standing up for their principles, because like people are ultimately what makes things happen eventually. That's I guess, to end this in a more positive note, a lot of the things that a lot of people think of as just sort of like systems that exist and are unchangeable are there because of decisions that people made, like real people at some point in a room who had a conversation and made a decision one way or another. And like, if you're a person in those rooms, you can make those decisions go a different way. I have done that before. I am like not on anything on the scale of like the entire economy, but like
No.
things that I feel are pretty important, I have helped them go
Well,
in a decision that I think is more correct. So that
and
is a thing that is possible to do.
and I think it is indicative that like systems are made by people.
Yep.
And yeah, and it's like, and even if like you don't have an outsized amount of power, it's like a lot of changes that are made to systems are grassroots. It's
Hmm.
like, it's like change is not something that happens usually all at once. It is usually something that starts with individuals making choices to act a certain way, and that change in behavior then bearing out through the system that they are participating and interacting with. So
Yes.
yeah, so it's like it would be great if we saw more venture capitalists kind of like acknowledging this failure of the VC system and then taking concrete steps within their power to move against it. Because that would, I feel, encourage other VCs to do the same. And I feel like that would eventually change the system. Small steps do make big waves eventually. That's how you get there, is by individuals making changes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the only way anything happens. Even
Right,
the
exactly.
even the big bad things got that way. But
Yeah.
for that in that way, they're not like forces of nature, things that have happened in human society because of people making decisions, and people can make decisions that can change them. And like that's not
Mhm.
always immediately obvious how that happens, but like
Yeah.
generally how it happens is not predictable ahead of time. So
No.
you never really know how it's going to work out. And I think
Yeah.
everyone should just do their best.
Agreed. Definitely.
Thank you for listening to the Fast and Broken podcast. I'm Carly Rector, and if you'd like to support my work, you can subscribe to my newsletter at carlyrector.substack.com.
And I've been Teresa Kramer. If you want my voice on your products, you can visit my website at teresakramer.com.
If you enjoyed this podcast, leave us a like or a review. It lets us know people are listening and helps more people find the podcast. See you next week.
Bye.